And in which war did you serve?
I was in the very early days of Vietnam.
Okay. And what branch of service did you serve under?
U.S. Navy.
Okay. And what was your highest rank?
I was a lieutenant, 2 bars.
And in which general locations did you serve in?
All over Southeast Asia and the Pacific.
Okay. And were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Okay. And where were you living at the time?
I was a graduate student at the University of Missouri and went to Olathe, Kansas, and I always wanted to fly and signed up for a naval aviation program.
And do you recall the date in which you enlisted?
January of 1961. I had to wait for a class date. I enlisted earlier than that, probably 1960 sometime, but I had to wait for a class date at Pensacola, Florida.
Okay.
So it was I was a second class of January 1961, Pensacola.
Okay. And so why did you pick the Navy? Because you wanted to, even though you wanted to...
There are reasons.
Yeah.
I was a product of the Second World War growing up, and when fathers of friends of mine came back from the war, some of them flew Corsairs in the Pacific. I never thought of anything but being a Navy pilot.
Oh, okay. And so tell me about your first days of service. So you enlisted and you had to wait a little while. And then what happened after that?
Well, we drove to Pensacola. I picked a guy up in St. Louis, and we drove down together. And then we go into what we call pre-flight, which is about a four-month indoctrination. We're enlisted people, and then we were commissioned. And then I started flight school. And flight school went for a year and a half, roughly. I had a son born while I was in Pensacola, and rather than choose to go on carriers, I chose to be land-based, thinking I'd be around home more, which was a fallacy. we deployed all the time. We were gone constantly, and but I'm very. It's one of the best things I ever did.
Mm-hmm. And so, what did it feel like enlisting and being in the military?
Oh well, misery loved company. I mean, we were all in the same boat. Mm-hmm. They lean on you pretty hard when you're going through training. And that's understandable because they don't want you if you can't cut the mustard. But I loved it. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Mm-hmm. I learned more in 5 years of active service than I ever any other single period of my life.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about the days of basic training. What was that like?
We had Marine DIs and lots of academics, lots of PT, physical training. Up at 4, the standard, make your beds and all that stuff, keep the room clean. It was. Some guys didn't like it. I didn't mind it. It was part of the game, Flight school was intense. They throw tons of information at you, and there's no room for mistakes. And it's a good test. It's a very good test.
And do you remember any of your instructors during basic training?
During flight school, I remember instructors, yes.
What were they like?
Some of them are pretty intense. They expected perfection. They expect you to know what you're doing. And of course, we're young and inexperienced. I mean, so you're learning as you go. But you have to study hard. You have to perform. And we work all the way up to landing on an aircraft carrier and all this, and it's good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so after boot camp, what did you do, or where did you go?
Well, our boot camp was called pre-flight, mm-hmm. and I went right into flight training.
Okay, and then after that, what did you do?
Then I went to flight training. Consisted of Pensacola, Florida, Whiting Field, which is north of Pensacola, Florida. Mm-hmm. Corpus Christi, Texas, and San Diego, California, North Island. That's where we got tactics and weaponry and learned how to be a real operative aviator. I mean, like we learned loading nuclear weapons. We learned procedures, and primary job at that time was anti-submarine warfare. So we learned lots of anti-submarine tactics, and but many other things too. We also did search and rescue and mining and what they call ELINT, electronic intelligence, and ECM, electronic countermeasures. You might call it sort of a spy plane. But, we had to learn all that, plus engines, systems, aerodynamics, naval courtesy. Intense. I still have notes dated February of 1961, notes from some of the courses that I took, and they're still readable. I found that very interesting.
Wow.
I didn't bring them to this interview, but
That's okay. So what were your first impressions of, like, getting out of, so you're done with school, you're done with training, so what were your first impressions and, like, what you went through? What was it like being all done with that and starting being an aviator?
Oh, it was terrific.
Yeah.
We also went through Celestial Nav School because, like any other job, in a multi-engine aircraft, you don't start out as the skipper of the aircraft. You start out as a third pilot. Mm-hmm. Third pilot is also navigator. In those days, we didn't have sophisticated inertial navigation systems and things that we have today. We use celestial navigation. Mm-hmm. And so we went through a full course of celestial nav. And,
wow.
That's star shots, sun shots, and that's how we went around the Pacific. Wow. I mean, there are other forms. You use Consulin, and LORAN, long-range navigation, but primarily it was all done with star shots. Mm-hmm. We did a lot of night flying, and fairly close to the Russian border. So it was exciting. It's as a navigator, I rode through one crash. They rejected a takeoff in Iwakuni when we were going on a tactical flight, and the aircraft ran off the runway into a marsh, and
oh man,
nobody was hurt.
Yeah,
but
that must have been scary.
It happened so fast it wasn't even scary.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, it was just get out. It's like I say, I was navigator. I was new with the squadron. It was in 1963, yeah. And we were back on the nav table, two officers, Tony Waller and myself. Tony was what they call a TACO, tactical coordinator, yeah. And I was the 3P, three pilot navigator. And we went through an Astor hatch and jumped into a marsh and got away from the airplane. Nothing blew. That was kind of my introduction to the squadron, which was an eye opener.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So after all of that, where did you go?
Just right back into doing our routine thing, training and doing tactical flights, and we didn't. They talked to us. The medics talked to us to see psychologically if we were okay, and everybody was, so it was no problem.
Yeah.
We were on deployment. It happened over in Japan, mm-hmm. And we used to fly out of Iwakuni, which is in southern Honshu, and go up the North Korean coast. And this was interesting because it was right after the 10-year truce, 1953 to 1963, and it had expired. So we were definitely watching for Korean MiGs, and then we go up along Vladivostok, which is just on the Russian side of North Korea, and up the Sea of Japan, and then land in Misawa on the northern side of Japan. That was an Air Force base, and come back and do the same thing going home. Home being Iwakuni. I was based in Hawaii, but these were deployments, and and in the meantime, if you weren't flying a tactical flight, you were training. A 3P has to move to a 2P, and a 2P has to move to a patrol plane commander, and so it's a ongoing, very intensive process.
Yeah, it sounds like it's very busy.
You do not get bored.
Yeah. So describe a typical day to me during your service. Like, what was it like just waking up? What kind of things did you do every day?
Okay, in the Navy, along with the pilot duties, you have ground duties. You're an officer in charge of maintenance shop in my case. I started out as an assistant materiel officer, which is a supply officer. And I had to inventory that crashed aircraft. We call it PC-6, PC being the tail designation of our squadron. Mm-hmm. And it was the 6th aircraft in the squadron. And so you have to inventory we have a lot of top secret gear. And so it was a busy time on the ground, plus you have a crew of enlisted people that you oversee, and they're the ones that really do all the work. And but you have to be aware of what they're doing, and then you might be scheduled for a flight that afternoon, a training flight or something. So every day, when you just go to work, let's say in Hawaii, I had a house off base, and I would just drive to the base in the morning, and just like checking into any job, say 8 to 5, or it might be 8 to 8, because if you had to take a flight out, there were no specific hours, but normally you checked in about 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh wow!
And flights, though, there were no rules on the flights. We flew holidays, we flew nights, we flew whatever. Whatever.
How long would the day go on for you? Like, what would be the average? So it's 8 a.m. till when?
It could be 8 to 5, but it could also be 8 to midnight. Okay. Well, if you have a flight. I mean, I didn't stay there working on the ground. Flights. And then later on, I became a test, because I was in maintenance, I became a test pilot when we have an aircraft in maintenance. And when it comes out, you have to run test checks. So you take a 2-hour flight up to run through the systems and make sure everything's working right.
So you mentioned that you went to Japan and then areas around Russia. Where other places did you travel to?
Oh.
I know it's going to be on the list.
Well, from Hawaii, there are many islands, and the Russians were doing missile shots. And so we would go out and observe Russian missiles coming into the atmosphere again, literally. Wow. We would do that out of Midway Island. We would do that out of Johnston Island, which was at the time a top secret island where lots of things were stored. And I spent a little time in Wake Island, a little time in Guam, and then from there, the Japanese islands. We were on deployment. We were stationed at Naha in Okinawa, and from there, detachments to Da Nang and Tainan, Taiwan, which is a southern Taiwan. We worked with the National Chinese and Cubi Point in the Philippines. And let's see, did I miss anything? Some guys got to Adak, Alaska. I didn't. I think that pretty well covers it. But
okay. And did you ever see combat during your service?
Our form of combat was more recon. We weren't out shooting guys or anything like that. We did carry weapons. We did run at night. Primarily, when my first deployment was routine deployment, but more of a reconnaissance type deployment up the Russian coast. And the second one occurred at this time 50 years ago, and that was the Gulf of Tonkin incident when the Maddox was attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin by a series of PT boats from North Korea. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, North Vietnam, and we got a heads up on that in Hawaii, and 2 days later we were off to that area, and that area being based in Naha, Okinawa, and then flying the detachments all over Southeast Asia, the South China Sea. Most of our operation was over water because the junks were running guns down to the VC, and so we were taking a look. We were on junk patrol to take a look at everything that came down there. There was a second attack, theoretically, on August 4th of '64 with the Turner Joy, another destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin. But it turns out that President Johnson and McNamara, Secretary of Defense McNamara, finally came out stating that attack did not happen. But it did get the American public a little bit behind the Vietnam War, which was a very unpopular war, as people probably are aware. Mm-hmm. We had aircraft that were shot at, but in the early stages, we were unlit, mostly flying at night because that's when they ran the junks. You might see a tracer way behind you or something, but we didn't take any hits. But, so if someone had really fired up upon us, then we had authorization to fire back, but nobody did.
Wow.
On our deployment, nobody did.
And were there any casualties in your unit?
No. We operated like there was a wing that would usually have 2 or 3 squadrons under its command, and I believe somebody drug a wingtip on a low-level night operation, and I believe somebody lost an airplane. It wasn't our squadron.
Uh-huh.
I'd have to do some research to check on that, but nobody was shot down. Later on, they started dropping. Later on, after my deployment, they started dropping what we call sonobuoys. They're a sound equipment into the canopy above the Ho Chi Minh Trail, because the canopy was so dense they couldn't see trucks running up and down, and they wanted to hear it when it happened.
Yeah.
And so they could monitor these sonobuoys and hear it. And the guys that were doing that, similar type aircraft of what I was flying, they beefed up the undercarriage of the aircraft to make it more resistant from ground fire. But they did lose 2 aircraft and about 20 guys. So they were. That was what they call a VO squadron. We were a VP squadron. V aviation, P patrol. VO aviation observation. But they were doing more than observating. They did take some hits.
Yeah.
But,
so were you awarded any medals or citations for your service?
we got letters of commendation for rapid deployment in general, and then we were all awarded the Expeditionary Medal, and the squadron was awarded an expedition. We didn't receive any air medals on it. It was early enough that really later guys would get the Vietnam Medal for being over there, but ours was the Expeditionary Medal.
Oh, okay.
We were considered an expeditionary force. I can't really define that. I'm not sure exactly the difference, but we were busy, I know that.
Oh, yeah. It sounds like it. And did you sustain any injuries during your service?
No.
Okay. And so did you stay in touch with your family while you were over?
Yes.
How did you stay in touch?
By mail.
By mail?
We were allowed phone calls. My wife was in Hawaii. Sometimes if you stand in line, I only did it a couple of times, but you could call them. Like I had a daughter born after my deployment. That would be 50 years tomorrow. She was born.
Okay.
I was in Taipei because we couldn't get into Okinawa because of a typhoon, and they paged Lieutenant J.G. Nickson in Taipei, and I couldn't believe they were calling my name.
Mm-hmm.
And they told me that Melinda Liu was born, X amount of weight, mother and daughter fine. Mm-hmm. And they said cover Ishimoto, and the Ishimoto Straits were between Taiwan and China, I believe. Mm-hmm. So they gave us a little quick order. It was just a message from our squadron, which had to evacuate Naha, Okinawa, and go up to Iwakuni. That typhoon was not supposed to hit Naha when we left on a tactical flight. Mm-hmm. And when we got back to the entry point where we get clearance to come back into our airspace, we found out the squadron had evacuated. And, but how to get off on that?
No, that's okay. And so what was the food like while you were during your service?
Oh, in the O Club, it was good. Mm-hmm. On the aircraft, it was, it was box lunches.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Was it rations or?
No, they were prepared box lunches.
Oh, okay.
Just, a little half pint of milk and some cold fried chicken and hard-boiled egg, maybe something like that. I really don't even remember. But we didn't cook. We had coffee, but our flights were so long, and in the winter we would have to wear what we call poopy suits. They were a survival suit. And you'd go down prior to the flight quite a bit early just to get into that suit. Mm-hmm. And once you're in, you're in.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to give you time enough to get into a life raft if you had to ditch or anything. And so you didn't drink a whole lot of coffee on an 8 or 9 hour flight.
Oh, yeah.
So my point being,
yeah.
you could relieve yourself, but it was a real chore.
Yeah. Oh man. And did you always have enough supplies? Well, like, did you ever remember running out of supplies, or was it well supplied in general?
Oh, we were supplied. We had anything we needed armament wise and fuel wise, and I don't recall any problems with supplies at all.
Oh, okay. And did you ever feel pressure or stress during your service?
Sitting here, as I said earlier, it's probably the most valuable 5 years of my life. But yeah, we got scared a couple times. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And stress, I don't know if that's the right word. Stress at doing a job, we just did it, and it wasn't intense enough. I mean, we weren't taking lots of ground fire. People after my time in the service saw much more action than we did. So I would say, in my case, not a lot of stress. There had to be some. Yeah. Anytime you get in an airplane, there's stress, because things we did, you can die from, and so, but not intense.
Okay. And was there anything that you did for good luck? Any good luck rituals, anything like that?
Not that I can think of. I didn't carry good luck charms. I'm not too superstitious,
yeah.
But as you get short in your tour of duty, you get a little superstitious taking flights out, because guys getting killed on their last flight and that type of thing, So you're a little careful. We used to do a lot of night operations on anti-submarine work and fly low-level cloverleaf patterns with 45 degrees of bank, which we weren't automated like today's aircraft. I mean, if you were down there, you're hand flying, and so you really did concentrate, and you really had to pay attention. And as I got short, they call it getting short, as you're getting close to getting out, I elected to get out because I was a reserve officer, and we were offered augmentation to go regular Navy. But when I got back from Southeast Asia to Hawaii, and the OD brought my oldest boy out, and he says, "Which one of these guys is my dad?" He didn't know who I was. And then, of course, I hadn't seen my daughter, so I said, I think I'm going to get out.
Yeah.
In a way, it was a good decision. In my case, I went right with the airlines. But things got a lot worse, and a lot of people paid a lot higher price than I did as things got worse.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do to entertain yourself while you were in the military, or while you were over there? Did you go to any shows? Or?
Oh yeah. I mean, in Hawaii, there's lots. I mean, it's wonderful. I fished, and we swam. I mean, whatever, surfed. I learned to surf.
Yeah. And did you ever go to any USO shows?
I'm sorry?
Did you ever go to any USO shows?
I don't think we had any. I mean, Hawaii is a very military island. I mean, there's lots of things going on, so I wouldn't call them USO. We went to lots of clubs. Pearl Harbor, I lived close to Pearl Harbor, and we went to clubs and sort of resorts that were military only, but actual USO shows, I don't recall any.
Okay.
But we had very nice facilities, very nice.
And did you ever go on leave, or did you?
Yeah, we went to Hakone National Park in Japan. In Hawaii, we went to these military resorts, I guess you could call them. It's primarily, it's all water sports. It's surfing and fishing and swimming.
It sounds nice.
Snorkeling.
Yeah.
It is. Hawaii is a beautiful place. I did not want to live there, though. I definitely felt like I was on an island.
Oh, yeah. And so do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events that occurred during your service?
Probably not that I could tell.
Yeah.
It's, we had fun, but I don't recall anything offhand, no.
Okay, and were there any pranks that servicemen would pull on each other or anything like that that you remember?
Oh, one good friend of mine who lives in Washington State now, he and I, as 2Ps, what we call second pilots, we would train together and take an airplane out and do training, and he'd pull an engine on me and things like that on takeoff, which I didn't appreciate. But
oh my gosh.
well, we practice engine out maneuvers all the time. But
okay.
I still don't want, if it's my airplane, I don't want other guys handling my throttle. It's as simple as that.
Yep. Oh man. And what do you think of the officers and the fellow servicemen that you served with?
Oh, terrific.
Yeah, that's good. And did you keep a journal during your service?
Well, I have a log. I mean, an aviation log. Mm-hmm. Not a blow-by-blow, everything happened journal, no. It's, in those days, we put some things on tapes. Mm-hmm. But a lot of stuff we do is classified, so you couldn't write it down. I mean, you get in trouble.
Yeah. And where were you when your service ended exactly? So you went through everything for several years, and then where were you exactly when you were done? When we got back from the
South China Sea deployment, mm-hmm. Then we immediately went to Johnston Island and did some work, and the squadron was transitioning into P3As, which is a Lockheed Orion. It's a 4-engine turboprop, lovely airplane. I would have had to extend for a year to go through that school, although I did fly in the aircraft several times, but I wasn't a patrol plane commander in it. So I would go out on observation flights. I'd go out on observation flights with those guys, and I was one of the last P2V drivers in the squadron because they were phasing the airplane out. And so any tactical flight that we had to do, I would have to do. But so I was in Hawaii doing tactical flights to some of the islands, and like I said, we followed the Russian missile shots and things like that. And then we had a car shipped to Treasure Island in San Francisco, and that's where I transitioned out. It was Treasure Island.
Oh, okay. And so you transitioned out there, and did you go straight home after that? Or never that simple.
Oh, it wasn't that simple. The car didn't have a heater because it was a Hawaiian car. It was the worst car I've ever owned. It was a Pontiac Tempest, 1964. I should have bought a Ford Mustang. They came out that year, but I didn't. So I had to. This was January of '66, and I had to put a heater in it. So I had a Marine who was home on leave because his wife was sick, and I went to a junkyard and got a heater and put it in the car. And then I had to drive down to Southern California and pick up my wife, who lived down there, and my new baby, and my 66. He was 5 years old, the oldest boy, and then we had to drive across the Albuquerque Plateau in the winter and put snow tires on, and then put chains on and then chains off, and with a heater that didn't work very well, and a dog, and a little girl with chicken pox, and a pregnant wife, and we went up to Colorado Springs to see my sister, who I hadn't seen in 5 years, and then on to Kansas City, and then I joined the airlines.
Oh, okay. And so, what was your homecoming? Did your family have any celebration, or was it just?
Well, homecoming with family, of course. It was just glad to see everybody and filling in all the spaces. But we didn't raise it. This was Vietnam. Still was fairly well. I say Vietnam, but because it was that era and people getting out of the service, people were fairly polite about it. Mm-hmm. Things got a lot worse as the war went on. Things got a lot worse for the guys coming home.
Yeah.
But I don't recall any negatives. In fact, I recall some people thanking us, for doing things.
Yeah. And so what did you do during the days and the weeks afterwards? So you got home, and what was life like after that?
I got, I got home and I saw some family. This is still January. And I joined TWA in February, so I started training again. So February 21st of 66, I went with Trans World Airlines.
Oh, wow, okay. And so you didn't go back to school or anything like that?
Well, that's a major school.
Well, I mean, did you ever go back to college or anything like
No, I had a degree, and flying was what I really wanted to pursue, and I was fortunate to be able to do that. I had a degree in geology, and I was prepared to fly as a geologist if I went into that. And I would have had to go on and get a graduate degree in that. But no, I just transitioned from one flying experience to another flying experience almost immediately.
So you said you went to you were on an air, or you were a part of an airline, and you went to school for that. Can you explain?
Oh my, yes, yeah. That's the. Well, I went right. I'm sorry. What?
So you said after your service you joined an airline,
mm-hmm.
and you went to school for that. So what did you do with that then? Exactly,
That was my life's work.
Oh, okay.
I worked. Actually, I worked for Trans World Airlines for 28 years.
Okay. What did you work as?
A pilot.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
I flew 727, 707, mm-hmm. Lockheed 1011, and the Boeing 747. And during the 747 time, the Japanese came to TWA to get people who were qualified. They wanted to start a cargo operation. All Nippon Airways wanted to start a cargo operation. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have enough 747 guys to get it going, so they came to TWA, and I got my foot in the door on that. Mm-hmm. And so I literally worked for the Japanese for 10 years. Now, part of that time I was with TWA, but after 6 years, TWA wanted me to stop working for the Japanese, come back and go through the 767, and I retired from TWA in 1994 and stayed with the Japanese. Okay. So I retired from them in 1998 at age 60. That was pretty much the requirement mm-hmm. at the time. Now they go to 65, but they changed that after I retired. Oh. That's okay. I've had a lot of fun being retired. So
yeah, that's good. That's good. And did you make any close friendships with your servicemen while you were?
Oh yeah.
Do you keep up with any of those relationships?
Yes.
Oh, cool. All right. And did you join any veterans organizations? And if so, which ones?
Since I went with the airline, I didn't stay in the active reserves. I would have liked to do that, but I moved to Connecticut because TWA sent me to New York domicile, and I didn't want to live in New York, so I moved up into Connecticut. And I would have had to commute to Willow Grove, Pennsylvania to do a little flying. And I've been away from home so long. The military is tough on married life. I am divorced from that wife, and I've been married 42 years to my present wife, who is a wonderful girl. But she wasn't with me in the military, and she's been with me all through the airlines. Mm-hmm. So I didn't do any reserve flying, is what I'm getting at. I was in inactive reserve because I was flying with TWA. I mean, how much flying do you need,
Yeah. And so how did your military experience influence your thinking about war and the military in general?
I am very fond of the Navy. Mm-hmm. I don't know a whole lot about the other services. I mean, of course, I know what we all know, but never having been in them, I can't talk too much about them. But the Navy was very good to me, and I respect it. I think things have changed in today's world. I think they're changing old traditions, which I'm not too happy with. I can give examples of that, but I'll be stepping out of the politically correctness, and it's. I have a very strong feeling that we need the best military we can possibly have. I mean, there are no limits. It's a number one priority because of our status in the world, and we shouldn't cut any corners with the military. It's very, very important to carry the big stick. It's I think we've proven that.
Yeah. And how did your service and experiences affect your life overall?
They've been a strong influence.
Mm-hmm.
It's, I mean, I still follow what goes on in the military. I'm not in it, but I mean, it gave me the skills that we had the finest training you could possibly ever ask for. Mm-hmm. So it gave me my life's work, and I probably didn't give it enough. But I wouldn't have done as well with the airlines as if I'd have extended in the military. Today, the required time is more than mine. When I went in, it was 5 years, and now I think it's 8 or 9 mm-hmm. if you're a military pilot. And it's changed everything getting out and going to the airlines. So I'm not well versed on that, but the military really was the best 5 years of my life. The most educational 5 years of my life. I won't say it's the best. I mean, there were lots of scary things and mm-hmm. risk, and then being away from home and all that. But still, it was good to me. Very good.
And is there anything else that you'd like to go over that I haven't covered in this interview?
I think carrier activity is very interesting, and even though I wasn't on a carrier or I didn't fly an aircraft that was carrier based, they were too big. I did qualify on a carrier, and that's very exciting, and that's just one of the closest I ever came to dying was losing an engine in qualifications, not on the carrier, but what they call FCLPs, Field Carrier Landing Practice in Texas in the heat of the Texas sun. I lost an engine, and fortunately, because of good training, and we got out of it 100%. Didn't even hurt the airplane. But the guys that are on carriers really earn their money. Mm-hmm. It's quite an operation. It's an amazing operation. It's if the public could see more of it, they would just be blown away about what goes on there by 19-year-old kids doing the ground, and not the pilots, but the people doing the groundwork and moving the coordination and everything. It's amazing. It's just amazing.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your service and also for taking the time to be interviewed.
Oh, it was my pleasure.